Hi, everyone. I just wanted to apologize for the occasional sort of audio crackle you'll hear in this episode. It is very much embedded in Troy's mic. I wasn't able to edit it out, unfortunately. Hopefully, it's not too bad. To the show. The start of this is going to be really weird for any audio listeners. Have fun.
Now it's a dick pic.
What?
That's not just like a dick pic.
Oh, the angle was too low? You're a titty streamer now?
Titty streamer. Hey, everybody, just make sure you like and
But no plunging neckline today.
I can make it plunging.
Yeah, we need to use you as our clickbait more often, Troy. So if you could sexualize yourself slightly more, that would be really helpful for the show.
Look. I think we all know if this thing was going to lean on like sexual energy, it's clearly going to be Mike Bithell. Yeah, it's 100% Mike Bithell.
Absolutely.
No offense, Austin. It's just Mike Bithell.
Oh, none taken. I'm in agreement.
That's I work at it. That's all it is.
Yeah, flaunt what you have. I get it.
It's the haircut that did it for me too. I was like, he was kind of good looking before, and then it was like, get that haircut. I was like, that's a snack right there.
I also saw someone share a screenshot from the show a while ago, and it, like, just comparatively, Mike, it looks like you've lost a bunch of weight.
I have, yeah.
And I guess because I see you regularly,
it's the anxiety of doing this weekly.
Dude, I'm just
I lose 2 pounds every time we do this.
I am straight as a country road, but the second that Carrie decides that she's just tired of you, it is you and me. And then Austin on the side, and then Alana gets to officiate the most horrid trifecta wedding ever.
I'll DJ your shitty wedding.
Yeah, dude.
On the side.
I am on the side. It's like, it's your night tonight.
My fate could be worse, I guess.
Well, that's a cold open and a half. Hi, everyone.
That is a great cold open. Hey!
That's a hot open right there.
And the fan fiction goes boom.
I am joined by Troy Baker, who is a video game actor, Austin Wintory, who is a video game composer, and Mike Bithell, who is a video game director / programmer.
We always have to say that.
Point it.
Look how easy I did that. I did that so easily. Why?
Still is completely irrelevant to my
But I know. But I'm saying for me, I pointed from my perspective. Normally, it's like super weird. I think I've been trying to do it with my left hand or something. I don't know. It's like boom, boom, boom.
You know what? I'm proud of you. No, it's completely irrelevant. But I'm
24 episodes of preparation.
Skills, everyone. It's amazing. Great core mode skills, man. Like, it's just impressive.
So there are like a million things to talk about right now, to the extent that I wasn't sure what to talk about. Austin suggested some super good topics, and there is one that I wanted to dive into straight away, but I do also want to talk about the Nintendo leaks. I did explicitly promise you at the start of the show last week that I would talk to you about the Mandalorian Emmys and then never return to it, which means I broke my promise. I'm super sorry.
I don't care about that anymore.
Oh, he's moved on.
Wait. The Mandalorian Emmys?
Nominations.
Yeah, it was nominated for like every category. It's an insane sweep. It's breaking stuff. But we're going to jump into the video game discourse this week. The discourse, we call it. Which is specifically, I believe it was a Polygon article that was published that was about how video games need to go back to being black and white.
Yeah, what was that article? I
think it was mainly a critique of Troy's performances from the article I read, right?
Yeah. It's just the use of the term sludge when he was talking about now they're just gray sludges. I'm like, no, that is the. I'm the who is the writer? I want to make sure I'm not like just. Was it a he or a she?
I sadly don't know how to pronounce this name. It's from someone called Ki-Hoon Chan, and I don't know.
They, perfect. I in reading the article, I understand the position that they're coming from, but it's such a reductive oversimplification of like stories just need to be this. I'm like, well, that suits your taste, and this is the problem. It's not, I mean, I suppose we could say it's discourse. But there's not really much of a discourse when someone touts their opinion as objective fact. And that's the problem that I immediately had with the article. Is like, what are you talking about? It didn't.
For me, it pinged.
Go ahead.
We about to say something, Alana?
I was just going to say that's an interesting point because that's often just the way that features are written. It is all on you to inherently know that. And I actually do edit most of my editors to be like, you need to write this like an opinion. I think I do that. But that is the format. The correct format of writing a feature, especially if it's an argumentative essay style of feature, is to write it like it's a fact, and it's on the audience to know this is an opinion, because of course it's an opinion, rather than like leaving a comment, that's your opinion, man. Yeah, so it is an interesting one to talk about, in that like I do get frustrated when people write things as fact, even though it's their opinion. But you are also supposed to, of course you know that's their opinion. Like, you know that, Troy.
But it's also, is it not incumbent upon them to go, I feel this, I find this is my opinion, and then to state the supporting evidence as fact. You know what I mean? It's not, again, you can't say the earth is flat. And it's
super
to me, that
interesting
is like,
one, because again, that's the way that I write, is an argumentative essay, is you write a sentence and then you back it up with a source in the next sentence. But generally the format of a feature, you do not have to write, in my opinion. In university, they would consider that clutter, because they would be like, why are you telling me? I know this is an opinion piece.
It's an assumption of an opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, you could also just, even if they are asserting it as fact, it's easy to just sort of go down that rabbit hole of saying, you know, unless you are sort of empirically backing these claims, then it is your opinion, irrespective of what you label it.
But that's what the thing is.
I do like that our response to this feature is to have a debate about whether features should be black and white or grey.
Kind of.
Like we've kind of immediately gone meta. It's
very meta, I guess.
But the problem is that I found in the article, that article specific, is that there was not immediate, and forgive me if I'm forgetting something and call it to memory, but there wasn't empirical evidence to support it. It just continued to be a subjective opinion to support the subjective opinion. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, do you notice how they did this? And then there's this, but then there was, it's no objective opinion. It's like, the characters feel sludgy, and they don't feel like they do anything. It's like, okay, but back up your opinion with objective fact, as opposed to, I just feel this way. Chocolate is.
Is there a way of making that argument objectively though? Like, I mean, sure. I have my own opinions on the article, but like, could they realistically have done that? Like, it feels.
Well, I think
it's all subjective. Yeah.
My face just did so much. No, the answer is right. No. You cannot actually.
That's what I suspected, to be honest. Yeah, I assumed. However, you can't really.
What Troy is asking for is, again, my favorite style of writing, what I asked for from all of my editors, what I asked for at IGN. Like, as a managing editor, what I make people write is the same thing as Troy, because it is my preferred medium, is an argumentative essay, which is every sentence you write, I need a source from you. Unless you say it's my opinion, because you're a fucking journalist. I'm not here to read your opinion. I am here to have you get a lot of information that I won't necessarily access and put it together and present a piece. Like a most recent edit that I did was someone made a comment along the lines of, the minimum wage hasn't increased in this amount of time. And I was like, who the fuck are you to say that? Like, I get that might be common knowledge to you and you think that that's something you know, but I need a source for that information. An argumentative essay is for sure my preferred medium, but what this feature actually is an editorial. And the way that IGN gets around just like an editorial opinion piece is by putting opinion in the headline. Polygon didn't do that. It does make a difference. You can't do it objectively, but you can do it in a way that is researched and less subjective, which I think is what Troy is asking for, which I personally agree we should ask for more of. I agree with you that.
And not only that, it's whether you put that, prerequisite or whatever at the top of it that says this is an opinion, it's just poorly written. That if you want me to believe what you're saying is a fact, or at least is a strong enough argument.
If they want to convince you.
Yeah, then come at me with other thing than just your opinion, because I can't argue your opinion. That's just like, if someone were to say this, it's like, okay, well, I think chocolate is gross. Okay, I can't argue that. But if you go, did you know that what chocolate is made of actually negatively impacts your body, regardless of your system, regardless of your taste buds, but chocolate, because it's made of this thing, or chocolate is healthy for you. That's your opinion, but you can actually back it up and say, because of these properties that chocolate has, I can support the fact that this opinion is well-founded. And what I didn't see in that article was someone just going, I just didn't like it. Like, that's not, then they don't need to return to suit your taste. Don't play the game.
For me, so that's funny because it gave me this flashback to, I remember reading, I want to say this
was too long.
For the record, I do just want to counter. I do actually think this piece is well written. I do think this writer is a good writer. I do think their sentences are like coherent and nicely written. I don't want to discredit them for that, but I also understand your issue with basically this format in general. Sorry, go ahead, Austin.
It sounds like it's a more of an editorial criticism Troy's maybe leveling rather than
yeah, which I totally get.
Right?
Oh, dude.
Well-
Sorry, Austin. I'm not trying. I just want to ping on this just real quick.
We'll just go around the circle.
And Austin will back this up hopefully as well. I thrive on discourse and even contentious conversation. I love having my views, my beliefs
No,
challenged.
you don't. Prove it.
How dare you? Yes, citation needed.
I love it when someone presents something, especially when it's an oppositional view, and gives me the opportunity to go, oh shit, I never thought about it that way. Let me think about that. Do I really feel this way, or have I just always believed this to be true? So I actually love it when someone does that. I don't feel this person did that, and they didn't ever cite me specifically, even though they cited the game. So it's not like I have some bias to it. I wanted them to be like, prove me wrong, challenge my beliefs, let there be some actual discourse. That's why I'm saying it. I'm not saying they didn't have a grasp of the human language or that they don't write in a specific format. I'm saying their argument wasn't strong because there was no empirical evidence. Go ahead, Austin. Sorry.
I don't disagree. For me, the funny thing is that the case I thought they were going to make is not the one that they ended up making, because it reminded me of almost 20 years ago. I think it was Time magazine, although I honestly don't remember. It could have been any number of magazines, but I remember when the Lord of the Rings films came out, and they were just monumental success. I remember reading an article that basically was saying, why do we love these movies so much? And their argument was the Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers and Return of the King had all come out right on the heels of September 11th, when the clarity of morality was shaken horrendously, and that the escapism represented by good old-fashioned good versus evil, where it was no longer about, is Frodo good seen through the right lens? Does Sauron have a point that's worth considering? Like, these films completely eschewed that, right? And in keeping with the source material, and they said the world got really messy because September 11th, it unified everyone, but then very quickly everyone said, well, the U.S. foreign policy has not exactly sort of failed to, dare I say, invite some kind of response, violent or political or whatever. And it's just like very quickly we were down this rabbit hole of going, yeah, this we really want to make this good versus evil, but it's not so clear cut, even just on a skin deep reading. And that these movies came along and offered us this glorious escapism. I thought that was the angle they were going to take, that they were like, because the world is as or more gray now than it was then. And I thought they were saying, why on earth do I want my games to be a reminder of how fucking difficult to navigate everything is? I was sure that's where they were going to go. And it wasn't at all. They actually went the opposite. I was actually amazed that this sort of secret ending of this article, if you make it all the way to the bottom, is to say, it was actually surprisingly ideological, and irrespective of where you land on their comments, they were basically saying, we live in a world where there really are right and wrong arguments being made, and you can say, somebody says Black Lives Matter, and another one replies, well, all lives matter, as just an example. That's not quite how they phrase it in the article, but they're basically saying, one of these is right and one is wrong. And they're basically touting that as their claim. And I was like, now you see, that's where you might lose me, because I'm inclined to agree with you, but you do have to back that up, because this is gray, actually. Like, there are counter arguments. They may not be convincing. I may not be convinced by them. Many people may not be, but they do exist. And you're basically saying, the world is actually quite objective, and it's annoying that these games don't reflect that. That was my takeaway from the article, and I thought, well, now that's the opposite claim I thought you were going to be coming with. I was really sure that you were saying you bemoan the lack of escapism that they represent, and it didn't seem to be that. So to me, it was...
Austin, because you're the one who suggested it, and because I feel like we dove right into this topic, do you want to, just a little briefly, even though you already have, just explain what the article is? because like we didn't actually do that.
Sure.
Oops.
Yeah. Well, it was an opinion piece. I just pulled it up, and actually, to your point, Alana, it actually does say opinion
right.
as a banner at the top. I didn't remember that. Ki Hoon Chan, forgive my mispronunciation if it's
My
wrong.
coffee buddy.
Games need to. It's a Polygon article. Games need to return to black and white morality, and they use both BioShock Infinite and The Last of Us as two of their
fucking dunked on, Baker.
Yeah, trigger.
Get wrecked.
their case studies.
And
And Far Cry.
And Far Cry too. I was like, well, first of all, that could be there's two other people at least that they could be picking on, and now Giancarlo Esposito can be added to it. But would you not say? Here's where I kind of what pinged me immediately. I'm fine with someone having an opinion piece. I feel like saying something games need to do this, or as opposed to why games could benefit by returning to black and white morality.
Does does the article itself say that? Because I think it might be a case of, I can't remember if the article made that strong if the article made that strong a statement, or the headline, right, which is an editorial choice again. Like, I wonder. I can't remember if the body of the text actually goes as far as to say this must be like this. I think that the headline is obviously written to be decisive and interesting, and divisive.
It says what I crave and what I think we deserve: a black and white game centered around the concept of absolute objective morality. So it doesn't say they must be like this, and I do think like
it's saying I want, right?
No,
it's saying
games need to return to black and white morality.
The headline, that's the headline, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's the
but
headline.
headlines.
But the writer doesn't write the headline.
Yeah,
Sorry.
That's a whole
Is that
other
true?
thing. In some cases, yeah, headlines are often really very much.
But in an
workshopped.
opinion piece like this, is that an editor in chief or whatever? I'm not.
It's usually a body of people who pick a headline. Generally.
And it's a headline designed to get us to click,
Inside
right?
Gaming Daily today. Yeah. I wake up to do that at like 7. I did it on the Nintendo Switch sales reports, which is crazy shit. And then at 9, everyone else jumps in, reads what I've written, and we brainstorm headlines amongst about 7 people until we pick one that is going to traffic well. And then I edit the very start of the script to make sure that it fits in line with that headline. And that's
so it's
the
a
exact
systemic problem. It's not an individual.
It's how it's a
lot of shades of grey, Troy. What shades of grey?
It needs to go back to black and white.
To Austin's earlier point, I do think this it's very interesting that this piece, without referencing any other philosophical pieces, ends up making an extremely philosophical, very hard stance, which is that there is objective morality, which is a whole thing that I'm like,
I mean, that's like from a philosophy standpoint, the idea of objective morality is.
I feel like I don't
needless
think
to say.
is a thing.
There's objective ethics.
Well, I mean, if you want to get into it, that's one of those where I don't think that is considered amongst philosophers a settled issue. But where I've personally landed on that, and I'm, as with Troy, always subject to being challenged and revised. But it seems to me that objective reality, or objective, well, that as well, but objective morality, objective morality is essentially non-existent, but you can make objective there can be objective moral like choices or movements if everybody agrees on the fundamental goals. And so that, in other words, if we agree on what basically morality helps us choose what is good, better, best, on down, but we have to agree on what that high point is. And so generally people do seem to agree that human well-being would represent the shared goal. If we have a shared goal, then we can make objective assessments about whether such an action moves us closer or further away from that well-being, many of which may be subject to intense debate, but that there is potentially movement along that spectrum.
This is
so
complicated. Like even that you could poke
yeah,
in, right? Like it is a really complicated conversation, and I mean,
for sure.
While I would love to talk about philosophy this whole time, to just at least address more of this article, I inherently do disagree with it. I don't disagree with the way it's written. I agree that, like, for the way, if I had written this, I would have tried to probably reach out to either studios to even ask how they approach morality to philosophers to discuss this kind of thing. That is probably more along the lines of what I would have done, but I don't mind reading a very strongly worded article. But I also don't agree because, Austin, you bring up the 9/11 Lord of the Rings thing. The idea that sometimes you need something comforting to save you from the real world. The things that immerse me the most are the things I'm thinking about for the longest amount of time. Like when I read Watchmen, that's very gray. And that was something that I found very immersive because it wasn't black and white, which means I have to think about it more at all times. And it can make you think about real world politics and make parallels that you'd prefer to avoid, which is probably inherently unhealthy in its own right, but that's a whole other thing. But I think things that are gray are generally more immersive because you are having to assess things constantly rather than having a literal black and white moral.
But well, it's where I think that they fail to differentiate at least two types of narrative experiences. It kind of equivocates as though all games fit under the same umbrella. And in my mind, there's at least two different categories here. There's like the allegory, like Greek mythology or something. That's where your black and white morality starts to be more useful because it's a story that is used in an intentionally sort of abstract, unrealistic way from which to gain a vantage point, to say, oh, here's where I am relative to this kind of paragon of enlightenment or whatever. But it's intentionally unrealistic. And yes, there are lots of games of good versus evil that to me are essentially, they're like mythic tales in that way. Whereas something that's trying to get into the meat of life, I mean, would they make the same argument that like Hemingway would do better to be more black and white and countless, endless authors and literature and film throughout history, because they're not going for that abstract, unrealistic allegory type fiction. They're going for something that's supposed to feel very true to life. And to me, that was the real coup of The Last of Us and BioShock Infinite, for all of its amazing unrealism. The notion of like discovering, it's the same as The Dark Knight, right? Like discovering when you are the thing that you are supposedly trying to destroy. Spoiler for BioShock Infinite, 8 years in the making. To me, it's like, that's great. I can't imagine finding that that's somehow taking away from the art of games. I'm like, games didn't have this for the longest time. And now that we're starting to get really, really substantive explorations of gray morality, it's like, whoa, tap the brakes on that. I found it a baffling take.
I think it's also very akin to someone saying games need to return to platformers. Games need to return to
I agree. More 3D platformers. Bring them back.
Banjo. But not even 3D.
Isn't that
it's
one,
like games should just be this. This is what games should be. It's like, who says? Who dictates
exactly. That? Isn't that like what the crux of the absolutely ludicrous Gamergate type arguments were of like, well, you're ruining what my perception of games supposed to have been.
Yeah.
I need my, my brusque, emotionless men and super sexualized women, and don't fuck with my. It's like.
But not only that, but it's also.
Since when are you in charge?
Not only that, but what you said, Austin, is like, well, why can't we have both? Why can't
absolutely.
you just be broad? It doesn't need to funnel back down into this. It can be all of it. You can have your 2D side scrollers, you can have your beat 'em ups, you can have your open world games, you can have your racing games, you can have your linear games, you can have all of these things. That's the beauty of this, is that it doesn't have to be, as we've argued before, there is no perfect model. This is something that is kind of an anomalous blob. It's like it's too suit to taste,
Also, thousands of games release a day. That doesn't apply to other industries largely. And I think one of my most passionate video game takes is that I want more games that are less focused on being cinematic and more focused on exploring gameplay creativity. And that's like a take that I'm like, use the medium of video games to tell stories ways that video games only can, rather than giving me cutscene, walk. However,
to do movies. Right.
But I don't want to get rid of The Last of Us, which is super cinematic. I still want that to exist. I also want Ghost of Tsushima to exist, which does plenty of walk cinematic. It's just that I want also the other things.
Right. But I also think, sorry, Mike, I love you. I feel like you have something you want to say, and we continually keep cutting you off. But
That's cool. No, I've got so many things to say, but I'm just letting you guys carry on for the time being because I'm going to veer it off in a million different ways.
And then I'll go.
I know, exactly.
And now
I just wander into the end.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like what games do have the benefit of doing is there are games that go, we want to make our games more cinematic. And that is where you will fail, as opposed to going, here's what I'm going to do. I want to create a good game that uses cinematic as an element, that uses immersive gameplay as an element, that uses emergent gameplay as an element, that uses good design as an element. And that's what gives you this great experience, as opposed to going, if you want a good game, you have to have cinematics. And that's what I don't agree with. I think the best stories that have come out have been the emergent ones, the ones that, did you know that if you did this, this will happen? And a lot of times it's the bugs, it's the breaks. It's if you stand here at this exact time and you do this one thing, you could see a horse fly in Red Dead Redemption. You know, it's stuff like that. So I don't agree with big cinematics equal good game. I think you can actually get bogged down in that.
Yeah, I think it's a AAA problem that they can get stuck with, but generally, like, in complete agreement, more variety of video games equals good, including in storytelling, where I feel like the industry can often be samey. And I think that it's been awesome to see that branch out in AAA. The Last of Us Part 2, I always think, and I mean, you might be able to speak to it, Troy, was always going to be controversial. Leaks or not, I think what happens in that game, some people were always going to hate it. And that's such a big risk for a AAA studio to take, when you could have made another story where you try to place Joel as the hero and have people play alongside, you know, the white dude on the cover again, and like keep doing the things you know will work. But they didn't do that. They took a massive risk. The Abby switch is a massive risk. And I would prefer that, whether people at large like it or not, than for things to always be the same.
And that's the beauty of it, is that what people loved about The Last of Us is that it posited the question, well, wait a minute, what is a hero? Is Joel a hero? Or is he the villain? You know, it's like what you said about The Dark Knight. So
I can't fathom thinking that's bad. No. Like that's somehow, because I think part of the claim of the article was that it's sort of it's distracting us into thinking that people who are wrong in the real world have sort of meat on the bones of their evil beliefs, and they use like white supremacy and things like that as the argument. And I'm like, but like, to the extent that any of that is gray, it's demonstrably gray. And to the extent that any of it's evil, it is demonstrably evil. Like, how does eliminating the conversation get us closer to understanding that and comprehending that? Like, you know what I mean? If things are considered above discussion or below discussion, I guess, then how do we actually learn from them? And to me, it was a take that I thought it's like I sympathize with their idea. They're basically coming at it from the angle of games can be a powerful way to help shape the world, and it can help shape people's thinking. And if we make them too gray, then some of the really horrible shit in this world will sort of use the same gray language to be able to slip by and be allowed to coexist. And my response to that is, you know, I think you should have a higher opinion of people's ability to learn and to spot evil where it is, instead of saying, no, we should be taught things are black and white. And that way we can use this language of good and evil to point at the white supremacists and say, look, no, it's just evil. No point of discussion.
Make games
it's
about
like,
how white supremacists are bad.
Yeah. It's like, we can actually unpack why that's bad. Like that doesn't have to just be treated as black and white. We can say, like, why have the fear that you might be so wrong that you should just try to make it bulletproof to any discussion? Like,
I mean, I
like
probably
would
have been a bit uncomfortable if Wolfenstein were like, but have you considered the Nazis' perspective? I would have been like, I don't know that I want to do this at all. I'm okay with not hearing the Nazis out Wolfenstein. I'm all right with that. So like, but I do also.
But what about no Russian?
Oh, no, Russian's like one of my favorite levels ever. Like, so
but how is that different, basically, from what you're saying?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I guess the difference is literal Nazis. I don't know, but like, I feel like part of the interesting thing to expand on here is people who watch movies that are morally gray. That's a specific audience. Video games, generally, people who are big gamers are going to play virtually every AAA release, or a lot of them, in a year. Like, it doesn't matter if it's morally gray or the story is there or not. So you could very easily have a Nazi playing a game that's morally gray, and if their point is like, well, we should be teaching lessons because the audience is so broad, like, again, I also get that, while simultaneously disagreeing with the ultimate point. It's also just a lot of pressure to put on a writing team. You must teach the lessons to the world that are objectively good is such an impossible task. You can't be done.
Well, plus that's what I also don't know that I think that that's even a worthy goal. Like, they always say writers, write what you know. And so it's like, write your thoughts or your take on these things. Like, I don't think Neil and what's her name?
Hallie Gross.
Hallie, like, I don't think they told the story that they wanted to tell. I think that is their only responsibility, and they did that immaculately, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Factually, objectively speaking.
I also really appreciate about The Last of Us Part 2 that I still don't know the answers to how I feel about some things. When I finished that game, I was like, Mike, I don't know can I spoil? I shouldn't. It's fine.
You can you can spoil if you're okay with the audience having it spoiled. Like, honestly, like,
maybe I just shouldn't in general. But basically, I was just like, I don't know what I want this character to do, and I don't know what this character should have done, and I still don't know.
When we were to that exact point, it like as a kind of variation on that point. When we were working on Journey, I remember actually going all the way back to Flow. Genova Chen, the co-founder of that game company, his whole MO was, I want to make mature content, and he said, to be clear, mature doesn't mean like higher polygon count, tits and ass, or violence, explosions, or saying fuck.
True.
He goes, mature content would be something like, if you play it at age 20 and then again at age 30, it will reveal different things to you because you're in a different chapter in your life. And then again at 40. Or if you play it before you have kids and after you have kids, or before you got married and after you got married, all that kind of thing. As you evolve, it reveals more to you, because in many ways it's more of a mirror than it is just this plate offering up something. And that really resonated deeply with me. And that, to me, that's the essence of what those gray moral tales are all about. Because your answer to Abby and Ellie and whatnot today might be totally different 10 years from now. I mean, Mike, I feel like you're kind of the living embodiment of that, where your reaction to the game is probably nothing like what you would have felt 10 years ago. Like, you've had a very
I had that with the first Last
reaction.
of Us. When I played the first Last of Us, definitely I played a different game when I replayed it. I definitely reacted to that game very differently years on.
Just in a different place in life. Will you? I feel like right now, you're like for anyone who ever watches Shark Tank, where Mark Cuban often just sits there and doesn't speak for long periods, and then just comes in and goes, "I'll make you a deal if you say yes right now." I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
I'm almost nervous. I'm like, what's he gonna say?
I know.
No,
exactly.
Yeah. So first of all, Wolfenstein. No. First off, no, I have got a whole thing, but my stuff is very different to what I think you guys are reacting to. First of all, I definitely disagree on some of what you're saying in terms of I do believe in certain moral absolutes. I think but I don't think it matters to this argument particularly, whether or not where you stand on that. I think the biggest kind of challenge and the other thing, one thing I wanted to say, which I didn't interrupt to say, was another trilogy did very well from releasing a couple of years after the Vietnam War, for the exact same reason, you could argue, with Star Wars. Yay, we did it. We got our mentioning. So yeah, Star Wars is exactly the same argument was made at the time that was the reason that Star Wars doesn't pull on Vietnam imagery but does pull heavily on Second World War imagery, was that it provided a much more straightforward war where there were very obvious goodies and baddies, whereas the Vietnamese War obviously was not viewed that way in America. No, the main issue I had with the article is I think it conflates a bunch of different criticisms and tries to meld them into one simultaneous argument. I think there's lots of good points in there and lots of things that I would agree with, but by combining them into this whole grey versus black and white, I think that's the wrong way of categorizing. I think there's an absolutely valid criticism of BioShock Infinite in where it places its ethical argument. I disagree with the writing team of BioShock Infinite in terms of their read of the ethics of that situation and what's right and wrong in that world. but I know what they think. I know what their stance was. I can react to their stance, or I can react to the stance as presented, right? They might have failed in writing and accidentally said the wrong thing, which we've all done, but I disagree with their take. Similarly, when I play Last of Us 2, I fundamentally, I think, disagree with the perspective presented in the writing of that about who humans are and what we are as people. I have a different opinion. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I bounced off that game, I think, to an extent because I differed. But again, a statement was made. That's not the same thing as making a black and white piece. I think all narrative. You mentioned Watchmen as a book which has lots of grayness in it. Sure, but I fucking know what Alan Moore thinks about everything based on that book, right? He makes statements.
Try not to think too much about what Alan Moore thinks these days.
But he has an opinion, right? He's presenting a perspective, and you could say it's moral, but you don't necessarily even need to take it that far. You can see his view of the world through the writing. I think often one thing we really often fall into the trap of is conflating someone's politics, someone's statement they're trying to make with their work with the protagonist of the story. And we say, oh, well, the characters in this story are shades of grey, so therefore this work is grey in its morality. Last of Us has an opinion about humans and about what humans should be. It poses questions, but it does actually also answer them because it's a story. On some extent, there's obviously vagueness in, I've not played the end of Last of Us 2. Sure. Last of Us 1 has a moral stance. It has an opinion on what Joel should do and what that situation should be. But it has to, because otherwise it wouldn't end. Similarly, you mentioned, what did you mention? Tolkien. Tolkien had a perspective. Lord of the Rings is filled with a guy in the 50s who's just been through a war and who has some not very advanced opinions about different ethnicities around the world. Like, that stuff is in there. I'm not saying that Tolkien's a terrible human being or we should hold him to modern standards, but he had a stance, he had opinions, he had morals and ethics and views that come through in his work. Even bloody Game of Thrones, right? Like, which is cited in the article as like something that's shades of grey. Again, it's the books, and I think to a lesser extent the TV show, because they're not as well written as the books, but the books have an opinion about humans and a statement they want to make about how we treat each other, about how history works, how history repeats often, and the choices it makes about which parts of specifically English history it chooses to call on with those stories. I guess my point is, I think the piece combines the idea of morally ambiguous characters with morally ambiguous stories. And I don't think those two. I think you can make a morally ambiguous story with an absolutely black and white character. And I think you can make a morally ambiguous character in a very black and white story. And I think a lot of the confusion I found reading it, most stories have that trade-off, because that's how you explore that. If you're making something... It
would be very hard to write a morally ambiguous story. I think if I look at any of the books I've ever written, they would all
because they're written by
unintentionally
people, right?
have my point.
Yeah. Even things like... and you can often find that later, right? Like, even an author who you're like, oh, this author is, publicly stated as being... there's been several cases throughout history. There's been a very big one recently, but there's several cases throughout history where an author has written a very popular work, has had a presumed political stance, and then later in their life has been, has decided to out themselves as having a wildly different political perspective. And immediately people go back to the works they've produced and go, oh yeah, it was always there. Like that stance was always built into their work. And some of that is Rorschach, right? Some of that is finding what you want to see in works. But a lot of it isn't. Yeah. I think we can't help but create works with an opinion. I don't, even if we're trying really hard not to. I think what's interesting with games, and this is my final thing, and then I will shut up. Games are by their nature a possibility space. So there has to be an element of choice. Even if it's a very linear story, there's still always going to be a debate there's a debate in any story, because otherwise you'd have no conflict and therefore no story. It would be a sermon rather than a story. But even in games, they are possibility spaces, and I think that's inevitably technically going to increase as time goes on, as we end up with stories that are more emergent, more built around systems. You are still going to get that stuff in, but I still think my point stands, because if you look at SimCity, sorry, this is just verbal soup now, I apologize. If you look at SimCity, right, the ultimate emergent story game.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so SimCity is obviously emergent. There's no story, there's no characters, except the dude who gives you advice when you're working or whatever. But SimCity is based specifically on a book on city zoning that was published under a specific government in America and has a definite political stance on how cities should be organized.
I did not know that.
Systems. It's totally true. And I think it's pretty middle of the road politically, but like it's a political opinion. The systems of SimCity are hard coded with expectations about how cities should work in an ideal situation. If there's a win state in a game, it has an opinion on what you should do in a situation, right? If the win state of the game is to kill everyone in the room, the game is making a statement about killing people, right? Like we can't help but do this. So that for me, it's kind of an argument that doesn't make any sense to me, because inevitably games will be grey, and inevitably in terms of the authors making them, they will be black and white. The author will have a stance and an opinion, and neither of those two things can really be removed. So there's always going to be this dichotomy. And I think that's maybe what the writer's reacting to, is that there is a messiness between those two things, and that's what makes great stories. That's what's interesting. And now I'll shut up.
I'm curious.
Sorry, I was spoiling all of that up as we went. I didn't want to blow into the...
Dude, there's so much to process in that.
Yeah, well, and there's something I want to specifically tug at in what you just said, Mike. You said...
Is it the Star Wars reference?
Yeah. When you said that you found yourself bumping up against the claims, the intrinsic claims about humanity in the writing of The Last of Us 2, specifically.
What was that, and what was I reacting to?
Well, it doesn't even matter. My point is, isn't that in and of itself laudable then? Because doesn't that mean that by virtue of you having something to react to and go, now I don't think human beings are like that at all, and la. That's Troy's thing about like the conversation at the water cooler the next day.
Yeah, I'm disagreeing with the writer, and that's okay. And I think that's something that gets conflated into that article.
It's not even that it's okay. I think it's actually better than okay, because it means that the writing that fails is the writing that makes its stance so murky and unclear that you don't even know what to take away from it. And it's like, I would much rather disagree than not know.
Yeah, and that's why I think BioShock Infinite's a really odd kind of choice of example in that piece, is because BioShock Infinite definitely does have a view, and it's a view that's stated, like the treatise of BioShock Infinite, whether intentional or not, is
intentional.
It's there's an equality between the two sides of that political debate. That's by using the artistry they are, by choosing the racial it's in the text. Like you definitely can make that reading. The who Comstock is and how that's presented, who the rebels are and how that's presented, and all of the iconography that's used in that story that puts in a very specific time period in American history. There is a statement being made, whether intentional or not. And that's something that I think, and God knows there was at the time, right? We can all debate whether we agree or disagree with that, or like or dislike that. But to claim that BioShock Infinite is a Shades of Grey game is really odd to me. But crucially there, though, that's where it gets interesting, because it was maybe trying to be, and that's the interesting thing, right? Is that's a reaction to, you could make an argument that the politics presented there are a Shades of Grey argument. There's good and bad people on both sides. Is kind of that's part of the political message of that game. That's different though to criticizing a story for being grey in its telling. Right? That's a different, again, it feels like 5 different criticisms or arguments about game creation kind of merged into one, and I think where those arguments overlap gets messy. So that was where I fell over. And to be clear on the Last of Us 2 criticism, because there'll be 50 comments, specifically my criticism, because I've not finished it, so I have no opinion about it as an overall thing. It's more just generally the zombie genre. Having been through a period in history where we had a horrible worldwide event happen, and a large proportion of the population chose to use that as an opportunity for reflection and for improvement, my perspective on how we would react to an actual zombie apocalypse is different than it was 2 years ago. Like, it feels like people might be better than we assume on a lot of levels, and that's we could do a podcast on that, right? But that's why Last of Us 2 came at a weird time for me. It felt like I had a different view on humanity than I did before. Anyway, sorry, I'm dominating now. I apologize.
It's fine. No. I just want to very quickly, have any of you read The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas?
No.
It's my favorite short story ever written, and I don't even need to get into it. I just want to give it a shout that you can read it online. It takes a couple of minutes. And it is something that like I've seen people argue before. I mean, it's really old. It's from like the 1970s. I mean, that's not that old, really, the grand scheme of things. But I've seen people online argue that it is morally ambiguous, and it's up to you to decide based on the ending of that short story how you feel about it morally and the conversation that it's trying to have. But I feel like it is also still, to your point, Mike, very clear when a writer has an opinion, even if they aren't trying to force it on you. And I think, again, if I think about everything I've ever written, I feel like I don't even have a say in sharing my opinion, really. I find that very difficult. I have not thought about it before.
I love it when you
I can write characters that aren't like me.
Yeah.
But not points
Exactly.
that I don't resonate with.
The characters are they're the dolls, the puppets we're using, but the story and the moral framework of what we've built. It's funny when I go back, because I don't play my own games until like 5 or 6 years after release, and I go back and play them, and I'm like, oh, I had an opinion about that, but I didn't necessarily, I hadn't put that into words yet, but it's right there in the text. Like it's an interesting thing. Like, reading your own writing years later and going, oh, I hadn't
Really
quite
thought
consciously
that, huh?
thought about that yet. Yeah. Oh, that too as well, definitely, that like you've realized you've moved on, yeah.
Yeah, I also think, like, talking about, games being morally gray, I mean, Spec Ops is like one of my favorite games in terms of the way that it's written. And I don't know that it's morally gray. I feel like it is taking a stance, but it's still challenging.
Very strong.
In a way that I also feel like The Last of Us Part 2 is challenging. And I do prefer to be challenged to think about characters in the way that it presents. And I even like that in choice-based games where, you're a Paragon or a Renegade, but some of those decisions actually are complicated. And I feel like BioShock did do a very good job of all of the various morality-based choice RPGs, where often I don't know what the right call is. I don't know if a certain species should die or rather should have their reproduction abilities limited, because if they don't, they will overrun absolutely everyone because their growth rate is so sporadic and they're so aggressive. Like, I just, like, that stuff is like, I know where I align on that. Don't kill Rex. But it gets complicated.
I know you went into that explaining like it as a morally ambiguous, but like even that, like, right, like how that plays into like stereotypical racist arguments is really interesting, right? Like which
I think is why my perspective is the way that it is like, if I apply this to the real world, we're not killing them. Come on. But, it's still something that it makes you think about in a way where they are still making a point, I think. I don't think it's like BioWare, I don't think are necessarily like, yes, you should kill this entire species. That's what we think you should do. But they're like, but here are the downsides to doing it. Here's why this is. And I appreciate that. Like, giving me something to think about, I think, is more interesting than having a game that's black and white in a lot of cases. And I'm trying to think about, like, one of my favorite black and white games. The first one that comes to mind is Fable.
Black and white. Oh, really? Fable.
Nice. Good game. Nice. But that's only because it's stupid in its decisions. Like, if I eat a live chicken, I will grow horns into it. But I feel like, I don't know, what's the best black and white story in video games?
I think weirdly Spec Ops might be the best.
Yeah, Limbo.
It's Limbo.
Solid. I think Spec Ops is black and white. I think Spec Ops has a very strong and specific opinion about the subject it's talking about. I don't think Spec Ops invites you to have the opposite opinion to Spec Ops.
No, it doesn't. You're right.
It doesn't go, maybe you're okay with genocide.
It is very much saying thing is bad. It's just the way that it eases you into thing being bad is that it doesn't initially seem to be so.
And I think there's room for all kinds of it. Yeah.
For me, I think, probably unsurprisingly, because I'm such a broken record on it, but Grim Fandango is, there's no moral ambiguity really presented in that game. It's like, it's a classic kind of film noir, intrigue where you've got the bad guys doing clearly bad things, taking advantage of, in fact, it's sort of ludicrously black and white, because the whole premise, what sets it off, is that your character of Manny discovers that this girl, Mercedes Colomar, who's supposed to be like a saint, she worked in like a mission taking care of the poor at the expense of her own living, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just like pile on everything that you can to make someone seemingly just the absolute epitome of perfection. And then when she gets to the afterlife, they tell her, you have the worst possible 4-year journey to the beyond, to the permanent beyond. And that's the whole jumping off point of the game, is to say, well, what the hell happened in the system that made you, who should be given the express ticket on the number 9, to bypass all this crap. And so that's where you discover all the corruption of the damned evil souls trying to figure out how to steal people's sort of golden tickets. And it's like, that's clearly, there's no, but that's where to me, it's like, that's why I was harping on the equivocation, kind of like the point you're making, Mike, about the article, where it made it sound like all stories have the same narrative burden, and that the writers of themselves are assuming all the same narrative burdens. And I'm like, I don't think Tim Schafer wanted to make a game that has us wrestling with the difference between good and bad. He wanted to tell a very different story that had different goals, and dealt with different tropes and all of that. And so it's like, to me, holding it up, because if someone had the opposite take and they say all this black and white is taking away from learning about real life, they could hold up Grim Fandango as like, here's a game that just doesn't get it. And it's like, what a superficial take on life. Maybe
I prefer The Good Place myself, but yeah, I take the
same thing.
Even
Really.
Good Place. Good Place. Which
does
is
that
all
show
about
get good? Because
Are you kidding? How far did you watch it? How far did you watch
great.
it?
Here's
No
the thing,
spoilers,
here's
but
the
how many
thing. When
episodes did you watch?
Wow.
I couldn't even make it to the end of season 1 because I was like, this is
Oh my god!
this is so cheesy.
You have to make it to the end of season 1. No one say anything.
Okay.
And do not read the comments, Austin. Please watch to the end of season 1.
Yeah, dude.
Because I heard
you.
everybody talking about how the series finale was like one of those that should go down in history as among the greatest.
I've not finished
Ted
the whole
Danson
Stop
gets
it.
to have
Troy. You are watch series 1, and then I promise you're going to immediately want to watch series 2. Your reaction to the show is exactly what the people making it want you to be feeling right now. Keep going.
I was out, and then I was like, oh shit! Now I see what they're doing.
All right.
Keep
I was sure that was the case. I was like, people whose taste I align with loved it, like ravenously loved this. And I'm sitting here going,
it's going to be your favorite
why?
show. Like genuinely, Austin, knowing you as well as I do, it's going to be your favorite show.
Yeah.
In a
all
few
right,
episodes
challenge
time.
accepted.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, just based on something that I think it was, I can't remember. It was either Austin or Mike said this. Is it incumbent upon games, or is it the function of games to instill morality or to discuss it?
I think they
Neither.
can't help but do the first. I think the first is a given.
They can't help but
depends on-
instill it.
I think we
teach
cannot. I think we cannot help but make work which has a political or any stance. Like we can't help but.
No,
make
no,
But
no,
that's
no,
not
like-
instilling something.
Yeah, but that's not.
Oh,
instilling,
you mean
it's
like an
I-
active, preachy
Yeah.
kind of?
Yeah, are we
make a
here
statement.
to? Rod Serling has a great thing about this, where he discussed this. He said that I will. Alana, you said this. I will, invariably, and inevitably, present. It will always be my words coming out of my character's mouth in some form. I'm writing from my view. Otherwise, what am I doing?
Yeah.
The difference, though, is, and like you said, Mike, it's not a point to. These aren't sermons. Although I think there can be, you can absolutely do that, which is there's not
I've
much
written
to
some,
discuss.
yeah.
It's just to digest. But I think that I'm questioning, is it the purpose or the function or responsibility of games specifically to instill morality, or is it to just simply discuss it and leave the audience to?
I
think
think it's. I think it's.
We're all like,
I think it's. I think I'm going to take it. I'm going to be pushy. I've not been pushy on this call because I feel bad for last time. I think it's up to the developer whether they do the first or the second or neither. But I also think it's incredibly fair for the audience and professional audience or people who just play our games, like to ask for what they want and to say, I would like more of this kind of stuff. Which I think is all this article ultimately is doing. Is, even though I disagree with parts of it, I think it's a reasonable request of like, I would like more stuff that does this stuff I like and less of this stuff I don't. Basically, I think all parties in it should do exactly what they want, and we'll all keep arguing with each other about whether our stuff is good or not. I think
I'm vehemently against the idea that games should do anything. If you don't want to tell a story at all, and you just want me to be jumping across platforms, I will do that. I've been playing a lot of Fall Guys. They ain't got no morals there. I don't think games should have to do anything. The one thing that I will champion, that I would put pressure on virtually every studio for, is accessibility options, so that the disabled community can play more games. That is one thing that I feel very strongly about, is trying to make your games more accessible to more people where possible.
Do you see even Ryan Reynolds has joined that discussion as of a few hours ago?
Really?
Steve got Ryan Reynolds to do like a video like for able gamers. It's amazing.
Oh wow,
Genuinely.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Really cool. That's awesome.
I missed that.
But yeah, when it comes to telling a story, I don't think you should have to instill anything. You should just discuss whatever you want to, or really the best stories are the ones that are passionately written. So especially like in the case of The Last of Us Part 2, it's, I feel like, one of the most controversial video game narratives ever written at this point. Just tell the story that you want to. That's what I want you to do. I don't want you to change any of it.
And to
For
do
what
it
it's
well.
worth, I think actually, I don't know that I think that there's a difference between the two choices that you offered up, Troy. Because when you say, is it incumbent to instill morals versus instill discourse about morals, to me, the first one only even makes sense if we all agree on those morals. So it automatically punts to the second one instantly.
Right. So if I don't agree with what you're saying, if there was a game that was like, great, it's creationism versus evolution, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right.
I was waiting for the quote that was going to be taken out of context from you.
To be able to say, here's a game about creationism or whatever. We would have to agree that that's a fact first in order for us to, I can instill, or in any kind of like Judeo-Christian, you can say, I'm trying to find something that is clearly so black and white. And this is why I disagree with the article, is to me, there's just not. There's not one. Even if you could say it is wrong to kill. I'm like, okay, but who is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
You can punt to the Hitler.
Ethics
and if you
are situational.
Right. And then I would kill Hitler. It's like, but wait a minute. You're doing the same thing. So hold on a second. So then it becomes this whole argument that you break down. Look, anytime you go to Hitler, it's just like dropping the nuke bomb. It's like a fart in an elevator.
Hitler's a great one. But there are some things that... no, never mind. It doesn't work. What I was going to say doesn't work.
Yeah.
To me, the whole notion of instilling morals is... The best that I could come up with there is that it would be... you're instilling you're trying to instill your moral perspective. But
I think
to me,
you can do it passively and not so overtly, and be able to go, this is what I think. What do you think? And I think that games that seek to do that.
But then isn't that the second of your two categories? Like, to me, they are not differentiable. They are the same. But
I think that games that try to do the first, that's where they fail, and that's when it feels preachy, and that's when it feels like...
But doesn't that statement make you as bad as the criticisms you're leveling at kind of this piece? Like, both should exist, right? There should be games that are massively preachy. You might not like them,
I
but
think
it's cool to have a range. Why not?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
That's my point, is like, go for it. But that doesn't mean they should do this or they shouldn't do that. That's why I think if you want a game that's kind of like, good guys wear black, bad guys wear, or good guys wear white, bad guys wear black, and that's just, I want to easily identify who am I killing, who am I shooting, who am I racing, who am I beating up, who am I...
Super hot.
Fine.
Bad guys are red crystals, and you gotta kill them.
Yeah, I mean,
never asked why.
It actually, that game actually does get like weirdly like in the weeds.
That game does have a story and an ethical stance.
Yeah, it actually does.
Is that a dog?
Really bad example, I love it.
But it also is able to kind of skate past that by going, it's all simulation. You're in a simulation and simulation.
I think that the differentiation then is what you're saying is more like a game that is shining a light on the fact that these are discussable versus a game that just presents it as if this is just a fact. That's really, I think, what you're getting at. If I could be so bold as to restate it, that's where I think The Last of Us is not making a sort of top-down objective moral assessment. It's in fact, that I guess would be the criticism of it is which I don't agree with. I loved this about it, but it is making the claim, look how gray this shit is, as opposed to look how good or evil.
But isn't that almost a black and white stance? Humans
That's
are
the
grey
thing.
and bad.
It's presenting. It's the BioShock Infinite thing. It is very specifically presenting that as a statement that the humanity exists in all.
And that is the argument of the article, is to say it's wrong to present some things as black and white,
It oscillates.
or as gray, which are
It oscillates
black and white.
but it oscillates between criticizing that versus criticizing. There are points where it critiques someone for presenting a black and white argument in a grey. It goes between the two, which is where I think the argument kind of falls down a little bit.
Sorry, go ahead. Go on.
No, it's all cool. I said.
You know what's really, really awesome about my job?
What's right about your job? There's no political aspect.
What's awesome about my job is that I get to spend a couple hours hashing this out with you guys, and then completely set it aside because music doesn't seem to care one way or the other.
There is no way to read politics into music, is what you're saying, right? There's no.
Actually,
or it
it's
helps
funny.
inform.
Connotations.
It helps inform it though. Like you can easily change a character by changing the music that's underscoring
sure.
that moment.
No, I mean, actually, that is intentional irony, because especially if you look at the modern classical world, there is constant contentious debate about how subversively politicized it has been.
Literally everything is. Even Google, because it was programmed by humans, is unintentionally political, to the extent that there are studies where if you look up professional hairstyle for women, none of them are women with black hair. Like, it's because things are made by humans, even programs are always going to be inherently political. If you look up unprofessional hairstyles, you will get black women.
And
yeah,
that's
but then
why I
the
kind
MCP is going to say, I've evolved past you. You no longer suit
So I
me.
still
I am
often
exactly
think about those
15
two fucking Google AI who developed a language to communicate with each other because it was more efficient than English, and they had to shut them down. They were like,
They
we
use
can't have
racial
any of
slurs.
this.
Oh
That's
no,
some
that was a
Skynet
different
shit
one.
right there.
That was the Microsoft one, developed racism. We're all. That's where my point is. Like, anyone who makes a creative work is going to infuse politics into that by nature of their experience. You can't help it. You make everything as it is a political choice. The question is, to what extent do you do that with intent, and how successful are you in conveying the point you're trying to convey, if you're trying to convey it? And those are the only metrics I think that you can put on top of your political stance. And that's
I'm
an
okay
interesting
with the
debate,
broad
right?
spectrum of that.
But
Yeah, of course. We should. I want to see all grades of that. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you must also truly define what politics means.
That's
Everything.
also hard. Everything, right?
No, it's not.
Everything.
Politics, I mean, like, look at the Greek definition of the
All right, let me
the
look that
root
up.
of the word.
But we've done stuff
Politics.
since then, Troy. As a society, we've moved on since the Greeks.
Have we? Man, because
It depends,
I
right?
prefer their version of fucking democracy, let me tell you that.
you can read stuff from Greeks and Romans, and you could read it as if it's a modern day newspaper. It's like the same shit. Politics is the view of the vox populi. It is the view of the people. It's not about politicians. Politicians are a byproduct. Go ahead.
The Greek
But you have political stances.
politics
Politicos.
is the set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations between individuals, such as the distribution of resources or status.
Has nothing
It's
to do
impossible
with
to make a video
Republican,
game without that.
Democrats.
But
Yeah.
no, but it's still it's
That's-
politics regardless of that. And if you're making a game, what are games about, right? Games are about interactions between people and the movement of resources between groups. It's like, you can't. The definition you just gave of politics, like, that's the stuff that games are about, because they're about actions and interactions. So therefore, every game is political. That's basically my entire fucking.
Every game is
point.
political. Every conversation is political. Every movie is political. Every book is political. Everything, because it's the discussion of ideas, like you said, between two groups. Even if it's a one-sided conversation, it is me as a writer, fiction or nonfiction, that are conveying my perspective and my beliefs, trying to either essay and prove my point, like this person did in the article. That's all politics. Politics isn't bad. Whenever someone says you never discuss politics and religion, I'm like, those are the only two interesting things. Why are we here,
true.
and what the fuck are we doing?
It's true.
If
How do we
anybody that
relate
says
to each
I don't want to
other?
discuss, if anybody says I don't want to discuss politics and religion, like, we're never going to have a conversation.
What are we talking about?
What are we talking about?
Does that mean that you think that when people make comments like, you're just in the midst of let's say that we were having a conversation about something totally else, and then we kind of sidelined into where we are now, and someone were to raise their hand and say, Guys, can we just leave politics out of it? Is it your assessment then that is essentially a fundamentally naive
person?
ask?
The only time that I think
No.
that request makes sense is if you are talking about politicians and someone's like, can we not talk about Democrats or party leaders right now? In that case, I would be like, okay, sure, that's fair. You don't want to talk about the current election. But I think, in the case of, can we not talk about politics? Yes, in general, doesn't make sense.
I think a person who says, not necessarily, I think naive
is it naive in the sense of like, can I walk around on the earth but not obey gravity? Like, you're basically saying it's so inescapable.
I think when people say I don't want to talk about politics, they mean they don't want to be challenged on the politics they have. And I think there's a lot of us who have the privilege of walking through life, and I know privilege is a loaded term as well, but we get to walk through life not being challenged on our politics. You don't notice politics until you see something you disagree with. And there's no moral balance on that.
Good point. I love that. And I also believe that most people who say, I don't want to talk about politics, the conversation that is being had is exposing their lack of conviction. And I'm not talking about lack of opinion. I'm talking about lack of conviction. I'm talking about lack of fundamentally understanding their own arguments. Tell me why.
I think, to be honest,
most people don't know why they believe what they believe. They just don't know.
Oh, that is true.
But I think what you're saying in terms of people should have the courage of their convictions, I guess, to a certain extent, right? That's pretty much the point that article ends on. I think on that, I definitely agree with the end of that article more than I agree with the start of that article. I think there's a lot, the idea of take an opinion. There are right and wrong answers on issues. We can argue about absolute morality, but there are definitely things that are right and things that are wrong. And
can we?
Having the courage to back up.
We can't do that now, but
yes,
I don't want to get into that with you.
Okay.
Moral absolutes. I believe in truth.
I'm not saying moral absolutes.
I'm
saying there are good and bad things.
But you said moral absolutes.
I actually said, I think if we rewound the tape, I said not talking about moral absolutes, but I do think there is. I guess the two are related and overlapping. But I think,
to bring this full circle, I am going to say, in the same token of being appreciative of video games that explore all the different sides of this and take hard stances and don't, I am actually glad to have articles like this.
Damn right.
From writers like this that spark these discussions where, same token, they are making a strong stance. And
absolutely.
We all, I think, fundamentally disagree with a lot of it, but it sparked an interesting conversation between all of us for over an hour. And is very strongly written in a way that's still sparked thought. I like disagreeing with things, so I appreciate that you wrote
evidence. Yeah, that is the evidence that it was a conversation worth having. Is because, like you said, 67 minutes later, we're still discussing it, and we have to hard cut it off because we can continue to do it. That to me is evidence. In the same way that a good game, the best evidence of it is the conversation that is found in its wake. When you talk, it's have you
about
played?
The Last of Us. I kept talking to people and being like, the fact that you keep wanting to talk to me about this means it has sort of done what it wanted.
Kind of.
You're supposed to discuss it.
Yeah.
You're supposed to feel strongly about what's happening. Yes, you do have to go. I'm not the hard out today.
I am the hard out. Oh, is this going to become a thing? We're we have, who's the hard out today? Are we going to have a thing? Look at us, guys.
It's almost never going to be me.
Yeah,
it's never going to be me because it's the evening for me, so I have no good excuse to leave.
Mike's getting drunk. He's like, fuck it.
Austin's playing piano, doing whatever he does. Get real jobs.
Play us out, Austin. Can Austin play us out?
Can you play something for us?
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.
How do you do that
Back
so
here
casually?
on Play, Watch, and Listen.